It's been over a week since the tragic death of Oliver Tree, so here's everything we know so far. On June 14th, the 32-year-old singer was killed when two helicopters collided over Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, killing all 6 people on board. One of the helicopters crashed into a car dealership and burst into flames, setting multiple vehicles on fire. One of the most disturbing details came from a witness who said he saw a passenger jump from one of the helicopters after the collision but before it struck the ground. Authorities never confirmed who that person was, but if the account is accurate, it means at least one victim may have been aware of what was happening in the final moments before the crash. The accident was reportedly so severe that Oliver Tree was left unrecognizable, with authorities forced to rely on dental records because of the condition of his remains after the fire. Among the other victims were Argentine YouTuber Gaspy, music producer Lucas Froda, director Lucas Vignali, and both pilots. In a chilling twist, another producer who was reportedly supposed to be on the flight backed out last minute because he was afraid of flying. More than a week later, investigators still haven't determined exactly what caused the collision. Authorities are reviewing flight records, radio communications, radar data, and the movement of both helicopters in the moments before impact. While some reports have suggested possible human error, investigators have not released an official cause and have warned that the investigation could take years to complete. This uncertainty has fueled widespread speculation about what actually happened. In a recent interview, the father of Argentine YouTuber Gaspy, one of the victims alongside Oliver Tree, said he personally believes the crash was an attack rather than an accident. He didn't provide evidence for this claim, and authorities have not indicated foul play was involved. However, the comments have resonated with many people online, where theories continue to circulate that there may have been something more going on than a simple aviation accident. For now, investigators have not found evidence supporting these claims, but until an official cause is released, the questions surrounding the crash are likely to continue. Since the crash, Oliver's remains have been returned to California, and his family has begun carrying out one of his final wishes. Rather than leaving his wealth to relatives, he wanted to use it to support artists through a foundation called Dr. Oliver Tree's extremely epic grant for baby geniuses, which is now being created in his honor. During an extreme heat wave in India, temperatures became so intense that the asphalt on this road began to soften and melt. As the surface warped under the heat, the painted crosswalk lines twisted and stretched into bizarre wave-like patterns, creating a scene that looks more like a glitch than a real-life photograph. Photographer Martin LeMay captured this awesome image in England after a weasel leaped onto a woodpecker mid-flight and took a ride on the bird's back. The startled woodpecker eventually escaped after managing to land. Here are some rare photos of the silky anteater, the smallest anteater species on Earth. Found high in the rainforests of Central and South America, they spend nearly their entire lives hidden in the canopy feeding on ants. Their secretive lifestyle and perfect camouflage makes them one of the most difficult rainforest mammals to find, and surprisingly little is known about their behavior in the wild. Is that what I think it is? An incredibly rare, ultra-premium, highly coveted Matsusaka sirloin steak. This is the last known photograph of a quagga, a zebra-like animal that once roamed southern Africa. Unlike modern zebras, quaggas only had stripes on the front half of their bodies, while the rest of their coats were mostly brown. European settlers hunted them heavily throughout the 1800s for their meat and hides, while farmers also killed them to reduce competition with livestock. The final wild quagga is believed to have been shot in the late 1870s, and the last known individual died in captivity at Amsterdam's Artis Zoo in 1883. No one even realized the species had gone extinct until long after the last quagga was dead. This is exactly why you should never drive onto a railroad crossing while the lights are still flashing. After waiting for a train to pass, this driver saw the crossing arms rise and assumed it was safe to proceed. But the warning lights never stopped flashing, and as he drove onto the tracks, the gates suddenly came back down, trapping his van between the barriers. At this point, he could have easily driven through one of the gate arms since they're designed to break away in these types of emergencies. But instead, he appeared to panic and began attempting a K-turn to avoid the tracks. With every second wasted, another train was rapidly approaching. The driver repeatedly maneuvered back and forth, desperately trying to reposition himself as the train closed in. By the time he realized he wasn't gonna make it, there was nowhere left to go. Soon enough, the train arrived and slammed into the van at high speed, sending debris everywhere. Remarkably, the driver survived after learning exactly what not to do at a railroad crossing. This was the moment a group of hikers found themselves just inches away from a wild black bear after it suddenly emerged from the woods and began approaching them. But instead of running, screaming, or making any sudden movements, the group remained completely still. Wildlife experts normally recommend making a lot of noise and appearing large if a black bear ever becomes aggressive, but this bear just seemed curious instead of violent, so the hikers decided not to do anything that might startle it. For nearly a minute, the bear continued closely observing the group while they remained frozen in place. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the animal soon lost interest and wandered away, leaving the hikers unharmed after one of the most nerve-wracking wildlife encounters ever caught on camera. One of the women ended up taking this epic selfie to memorialize the horrific situation. College student Daniel Chong was detained during a DEA raid on a suspected drug house in San Diego, even though agents later concluded he wasn't involved in the investigation and planned to release him. Instead, he was accidentally locked in a holding cell for nearly 5 days without any food, water, or a toilet. Chong later said he spent days screaming, kicking the door, and banging the walls for help, while hearing footsteps, voices, and other cell doors opening and closing nearby, raising questions about how nobody responded in all that time. As dehydration and starvation set in, he had no choice but to drink his own urine to survive, began hallucinating, and used a shard of broken eyeglasses to carve the words "Sorry Mom" into his arm after becoming convinced he was gonna die. By the time agents finally found him, he was suffering from kidney failure, severe dehydration, and other life-threatening complications before eventually receiving a $4.1 million settlement from the DEA. This was the horrifying moment a little Chinese girl realized that escalators are not toys. Somehow the child ended up hanging from the outside of an escalator, gripping the moving handrail as it carried her higher and higher above the floor. Unable to pull herself up or climb back down, she was dragged all the way to the top where her body became wedged against a glass barrier. As the escalator continued moving, the handrail kept pulling on her arms, leaving her completely trapped and dangling helplessly above the drop. Luckily, before anything bad could happen, 2 men rushed over, grabbed the girl, and pulled her to safety. Escalator accidents may seem rare, but falls, entrapments, and mechanical incidents have caused serious injuries and deaths around the world. This was the moment a woman instantly disappeared beneath the sidewalk. After getting off a motorcycle taxi in Brazil, she stepped onto what appeared to be a normal manhole cover. Instead, the cover suddenly gave way beneath her, sending her plunging to the hole below. The fall happened so quickly that she barely had time to react, and found herself immediately trapped in the shaft with murky water up to her chest. Luckily, a shocked bystander saw her fall in and ran over to the rescue. She survived with moderate injuries and was eventually pulled from the hole by people nearby. Investigators later determined that 2 men attempted to steal the cover earlier that morning and failed to put it back securely. Though incidents like this are rare, manhole falls can be deadly. Just weeks earlier, a 56-year-old grandma in New York was killed this exact way. This was the moment an MMA fighter was forced to face off against an aggressive dog. When a large unleashed pit bull suddenly charges straight at him, he reacts quickly, putting the dog in a headlock while keeping its jaws away from his face and neck. He stays calm the entire time, controlling the dog's movement on the ground like he's in a match. Luckily, the dog had a weak ground game. A few seconds later, the owner finally shows up and manages to control his massive dog. The guy walks away completely unscathed, and it's pretty clear his wrestling background is the only reason this didn't end much worse. In 2024 in Minnesota, an 18-year-old driver reported that his Honda Pilot began accelerating on its own and wouldn't slow down, even when he used the brakes and emergency brake. The SUV reached speeds over 110 miles per hour and continued for over 20 minutes, crossing into North Dakota while the driver remained on the phone with 911. As he was approaching a dead end, authorities coordinated a controlled intervention, using police vehicles to safely bring the SUV to a stop without a high-speed crash. Miraculously, the driver was not seriously injured, and the incident ended without any fatalities, though the cause of the malfunction has never been determined. This was the moment a birthday party Spider-Man nearly died within seconds. He dives into the pool in full costume, but when he comes up, the mask is completely soaked and suctioned to his face. He quickly starts panicking and trying to breathe, while the kids think it's part of the act and continue splashing him. He gets out pretty quickly, but continues struggling to breathe since he can't free his face. He essentially waterboarded himself since the mask had trapped the water, making it impossible to breathe. Luckily, a few adults recognized what was happening and helped him pull the mask off before he suffocated. Here's a creepy clip of a dog making biting motions at its owner whenever she turns her back. Each time she turns away, the dog stiffens, locks onto her, and snaps at the air. According to vets online, this isn't playful behavior, but hesitation mixed with fear or low-level aggression. Dogs are more likely to test boundaries if they don't feel watched, especially if they're anxious or unsure. It's essentially a dog working up to a bite without fully committing, and trainers say behavior like this can escalate if it isn't addressed early on. This was the moment a jewelry store was wiped out in just 30 seconds. In 2025 in Fremont, California, nearly 24 thieves stormed into Kumar Jewelers at once, armed with hammers and tools. Within seconds, they began smashing display cases and sweeping jewelry into bags as employees were forced to stand back. By the time it was over, $1.7 million worth of jewelry, about 80% of the store's inventory, was wiped out in just over a minute. The group dispersed in multiple getaway cars and several arrests were later made, but most of the crew remains unidentified and the majority of the stolen jewelry has never been found. In New York City, Darius McCollum developed an obsessive fixation on the transit system that led him to repeatedly impersonate MTA employees and take control of buses and subway trains. Beginning as a teenager, he was arrested more than 30 times after entering restricted areas, operating vehicles, and running full routes while delivering accurate announcements and staying on schedule. He wasn't stealing the vehicles or trying to escape, he was operating the job with precision. Each incident still carried real risk, and over time the pattern didn't stop. He continued being arrested well into adulthood, spending years cycling through jail and psychiatric evaluations. Despite national attention and a 2016 documentary about his case, there was still no long-term solution put in place, as he remained stuck between the transit system he was obsessed with and a justice system that had no idea how to effectively handle the situation. Here's why dozens of fishermen have lost body parts to a fish that was already dead. Wolffish have incredibly powerful jaws designed to crush shells and bones, but what makes them especially dangerous is that their bite doesn't always stop when they die. Even after the body is cut away, the head can still snap shut through lingering nerve reflexes, clamping down with enough force to take off a finger or other body parts. So in many cases, fishermen have reached down to grab what looked like nothing more than a discarded head, only for it to suddenly bite back from beyond the grave. This was the last photo taken of Juliana Marins after her fall on Mount Rinjani in Indonesia in June of 2025. The 26-year-old Brazilian tourist had plunged hundreds of meters down a steep ravine after being left behind while hiking near the crater. She survived the initial fall, and drone footage later showed her alive, moving and calling for help from a narrow cliff ledge where she remained trapped for 4 days. Rescue efforts were repeatedly delayed by thick fog, landslides, and the extreme terrain, leaving her completely stranded without any access to food or water. She was eventually found dead on June 24th, with an autopsy determining she died from severe internal injuries sustained in the fall. The case sparked widespread outrage, with her family accusing authorities and guides of critical delays and mismanagement. Rama Haruna was born in Nigeria in 1996 and appeared healthy at birth, but at around 6 months old she suddenly became ill and her body stopped developing normally. As she got older, most of her body stopped growing and she lost the ability to sit or stand, leaving her with a severely shortened torso and almost no functioning limbs. While her body remained extremely small, her head continued to grow and age normally, creating a striking contrast that doctors were never able to fully explain. Because she couldn't move on her own, Rama's family often carried her around in a large plastic bucket so she could leave the house. Despite constant pain, she remained mentally sharp and spoke about wanting to live a normal life. She died in 2016 at the age of 19 after living her entire life with the unexplained condition. In the 1840s, Anarcha Westcott, an enslaved black woman, was forced to undergo about 30 experimental gynecological surgeries performed by Dr. J. Marion Sims, who was later known as the father of modern gynecology. Sims was apparently trying to repair childbirth injuries called fistulas, and the procedures were carried out without anesthesia at a time when many physicians believed African Americans couldn't feel pain. Although his techniques influenced early gynecology, Anarcha has come to symbolize how much medical advancement was built on the suffering of enslaved women. Today, she's remembered as one of the mothers of gynecology, not for a discovery she chose, but for what she was forced to endure. Hugh Jackman has had multiple basal cell carcinomas removed, a type of skin cancer caused by long-term UV exposure. These cancers often start off as small, easy-to-miss spots, but can slowly grow deeper into surrounding tissue if left untreated, in some cases eroding skin and underlying structures. His repeated diagnoses suggest damage that continues to surface years after the initial exposure. While rarely fatal, basal cell carcinoma can quietly develop, recur, and progressively invade tissue, making it more serious than most people realize. He's since used his experience to warn others about the dangers of UV exposure, regularly urging people to wear sunscreen and get their skin checked. In 2004 in South Africa, trophy hunter Ryan Naud, who ran Pro Hunt Africa and was known for killing endangered animals, was found dead beside his broken-down truck on a remote road. His vehicle had overheated, leaving him stranded and alone. When police arrived, he was lying next to the truck with multiple gunshot wounds, suggesting he had been approached at close range and executed. There were no clear signs of a struggle, and his belongings were left behind, making the motive unclear. Many speculate the killing was retaliatory due to his work killing protected wildlife, but no suspects were ever identified, and the case remains unsolved. In 1995, 15-year-old Elise Poller was lured to a remote eucalyptus grove in California by 3 teenage boys she knew from school. But what began as a planned meetup quickly turned into a brutal attack. Elise was stabbed multiple times and strangled, and her body was hidden in dense brush where it remained undiscovered for months. The case finally unraveled when one of the teens confessed to his youth pastor, who contacted authorities and led investigators to her remains. During questioning, the boys told police the killing was part of a satanic ritual that would help their struggling death metal band gain success. They specifically claimed they needed to sacrifice a virgin, a detail that shocked the community and drew national attention to the case. All 3 were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to decades in prison. In recent years, 2 of the men have been granted parole while the other remains in prison, a decision that's reopened old wounds in the community nearly 3 decades later. This preserved specimen shows a child's trachea and lungs with a single peanut lodged inside the airway. Small, smooth foods like peanuts are among the most common choking hazards in young children because they can slip past the throat and become wedged in the windpipe, immediately blocking airflow to the lungs. In some cases, the obstruction causes instant suffocation, while in others it leads to infection, swelling, or gradual respiratory failure if not removed in time. Foreign body aspiration remains one of the leading causes of accidental death in young children, since something as small as a peanut can turn fatal extremely fast. In 2007, a University of Tampa student was walking back to her dorm after a pirate festival when a man she had just met offered to walk her home. Once inside, he raped her and disappeared. Police quickly collected DNA from the scene, but for 14 years there was no match and the case went cold. That was until 2021 when the suspect Jared Vaughn made a critical mistake. He uploaded his DNA to a genealogy website to research his family tree. Investigators used that database to connect Vaughn directly to the crime scene. Despite facing a potential life sentence, Vaughn ultimately accepted a plea deal in 2022 that only resulted in probation and being registered as a sex offender. This was the moment an airport security worker in the Philippines swallowed $300 in cash to avoid being arrested. The money had allegedly been taken from a passenger's bag during a routine screening, and when the traveler reported it missing, airport staff confronted the employee as cameras were rolling. Her bizarre attempt to hide the evidence quickly went viral online, prompting officials to suspend her from duty while an investigation moved forward. Here's the before and after of an imperial crown left mangled following the 2025 Louvre heist, where thieves forced it through a narrow slit cut into its reinforced display case, crushing the delicate gold frame as they pulled it free. During the escape, the damaged crown was dropped just outside of the museum and quickly recovered by authorities, though it had been badly deformed from being forced out and striking the ground. The Louvre has since formed a restoration committee and begun seeking proposals to fix it, with early estimates starting around $50,000, though officials say the real cost will come from the painstaking hours of delicate repair needed to rebuild the 170-year-old piece. In 2008, Vince Lee boarded a Greyhound bus in Manitoba, Canada, moved seats after a stop, and sat beside 22-year-old Tim McLean, who was asleep against a window with his headphones on. Lee suddenly attacked him with a large knife, stabbing him more than 60 times in the neck, chest, and shoulders, as passengers heard blood-curdling screams and fled the bus in horror. The situation turned into an hours-long standoff, while police waited outside and terrified witnesses watched from a distance. During that time, Lee decapitated McLean, held up his severed head by the hair, and displayed it through the bus window to those outside like a trophy. He then returned to the body, severed other parts, mutilated it further, and consumed portions of McLean's flesh, including reportedly eating his eyes and part of his heart while blood dripped everywhere. Later on, McLean's ear, nose, and tongue were found in Lee's pocket. He was eventually taken into custody and later found not criminally responsible due to untreated schizophrenia. He spent years in a psychiatric facility and was released under supervision, making it one of the most infamous and controversial cases in the history of Canada. This was the moment a man turned a robbery attempt into an instant retreat. Security footage shows a group of thieves pulling up to rob him while he was pumping gas, but instead of freezing, the man immediately sprayed them with the gas hose, forcing them to flee. Gasoline can be extremely irritating to the eyes and skin, causing intense burning, tearing, blurred vision, and temporary blindness. Being soaked in fuel also creates a serious fire risk, making it incredibly risky for attackers to stay close or continue the assault. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, here's a clip of a tarantula walking on the surface. Some species of tarantulas are able to stand and move across the surface of water thanks to a combination of their light body weight and the tiny water-repellent hairs that cover their bodies. These hairs trap air and increase surface tension, allowing the spider to distribute its weight without breaking through. When threatened or escaping predators, tarantulas can briefly run across lakes, streams, or flooded ground, giving the illusion that it's literally walking on water before climbing back to safety. That is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Here's an extremely rare encounter with the Tibetan fox, an animal most people don't even know exists. The Tibetan fox is one of the least documented wild candids in the world, native to the high-altitude Tibetan Plateau where it survives above 12,000 feet in extreme cold and isolation. The fox is instantly recognizable by its unusually square-shaped head, narrow eyes, and thick fur, giving it the appearance of a fox you drew in third-grade art class. Solitary and highly specialized, it relies heavily on plateau pikas for food, tying its survival to a very narrow ecosystem, which makes genuine close-up encounters in the wild highly uncommon. Here's some incredible footage of the oldest person ever captured on film. This is Pope Leo XIII, born in 1810, appearing in an 1898 motion picture at the age of 88. By the time this was filmed, Leo XIII had already been alive for nearly 9 decades. He was born when many people who had fought in the American Revolution were still alive, lived through the reigns of multiple emperors and kings, was already an elderly man during Abraham Lincoln's presidency, and is even older than your mom.